It's 3:47 in the morning. You're asleep in what feels like a steel coffin. Your bunk stacked 3 high in a crowded compartment with more than 100 other sailors. The temperature is well over 100 degrees, and you haven't seen land in more than 2 months. Suddenly, a sound cuts through the darkness. Within seconds, every man in the compartment is awake. There are no lights and no time to think. You grab your helmet and life vest and run barefoot through narrow, pitch-black corridors toward your battle station. If a torpedo strikes the ship, there may be no escape. This wasn't a scene from a movie. For sailors serving on battleships during World War II, this was simply another morning in a combat zone. They called these massive warships cities at sea. These cities had no windows, no easy exits, and the walls were made of thick steel that trapped heat like an oven. One of the most famous battleships of the war, USS Iowa, BB-61, stretched nearly 900 feet long, almost the length of 3 football fields. She displaced around 45,000 tons and carried 9 massive 16-inch guns capable of firing shells, weighing as much as a Volkswagen Beetle, more than 20 miles. At the time, she was among the most powerful warships ever built by the United States Navy. But inside that steel hull were nearly 2,700 men, all living together in extremely tight quarters for months at a time. On ships like USS North Carolina BB-55, as many as 146 sailors slept in a single compartment. Their bunks were stacked 3 high, made of canvas, stretched over metal frames with thin mattresses. Each sailor had only one small footlocker to store everything he owned. That box, barely larger than a suitcase, contained his entire world while at sea. There was no air conditioning on most of these ships during the war. In the South Pacific, where many of these battleships operated, temperatures on the main deck could reach 100 degrees. Below deck, where the men slept, temperatures often climbed to 110 degrees or more. Ventilation systems pushed air through ducts, and small fans were mounted on bulkheads, but the air they moved was hot, humid, and thick with the smell of diesel fuel, sweat, and metal. Some veterans later pointed out that prisoners in American jails during the same period often had more space and better ventilation than sailors on a battleship. Because of the unbearable heat, many sailors dragged their bedding onto the open deck and slept under the stars. It sounded peaceful, but it came with its own danger. Enemy submarines often attacked at night, and a single torpedo could turn the deck into a fireball without warning. Those sleeping near the bow had a different problem. Each wave slammed against the ship like a car crash, lifting the bow high before dropping it again, throwing sailors against their bunk frames. The constant thumping vibration of the propellers echoed through the hull day and night like a giant mechanical heartbeat. The day officially began at 5:45 in the morning, when the bosun's whistle signaled reveille. Sailors had only minutes to climb out of their bunks, fold blankets with perfect precision, stow their racks, and dress before reporting for duty. Life aboard a battleship revolved around something called the watch. A watch was a 4-hour shift in which each sailor performed a specific duty that helped keep the ship running. Some men stood watch on the bridge, scanning the horizon for enemy aircraft. Others worked deep in the engine rooms, monitoring boilers that operated at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees. Down there the noise was so loud that sailors communicated using hand signals. Others served in ammunition magazines below the gun turrets, ensuring that the giant guns above always had shells ready to fire. The watch schedule followed a relentless pattern: 4 hours on duty, 8 hours off. But those 8 hours were rarely restful. Sailors still had maintenance tasks, training drills, cleaning duties, and meals to attend. Real sleep often came in short, interrupted fragments. Feeding thousands of sailors was another enormous challenge. A battleship like the USS Iowa consumed roughly 7 tons of food every day. About 1.5 tons were fresh foods, 2 tons were frozen, and more than 3 tons were dry supplies. The ship carried hundreds of tons of food so it could remain at sea for months before resupply. Meals were simple but important for morale. Sailors often ate beans, cornbread, powdered eggs, canned meat, and extremely strong coffee that kept exhausted crews functioning. Fresh water was carefully rationed. Most sailors took what became known as a Navy shower, about 30 seconds of water to get wet. Then the water was turned off while they soaped up, followed by another quick rinse. Despite the harsh conditions, a battleship was more than just a weapon. It was also a floating community. Ships contained barber shops, tailor shops, cobblers who repaired boots, and even printing presses that produced daily newspapers with war updates and ship gossip. There were small libraries, dentists, and full medical facilities with operating rooms and X-ray machines. With thousands of men living so closely together, disease could spread rapidly. Even a minor outbreak of illnesses like measles or tuberculosis could threaten an entire crew. The ship's sick bay functioned like a small town hospital, complete with quarantine wards when necessary. A screen would be set up on the fantail of the ship, and hundreds of sailors would gather under the open sky to watch films delivered by supply ships. Boxing matches between ship divisions were also common, while letter writing remained the most important connection to home. Gathering around drinking fountains, known as scuttlebutts, sailors shared rumors, gossip, and speculation about the ship's next destination. In fact, the word scuttlebutt, meaning gossip, comes directly from these naval conversations. Yet everything on board existed under the shadow of one terrifying alarm: general quarters. When that alarm sounded, the entire ship transformed within minutes. Every sailor dropped whatever he was doing and ran to his assigned battle station. Watertight doors slammed shut throughout the ship, sealing compartments to prevent flooding if the ship was hit. Once those doors closed, there was no going back. If flooding occurred in a sealed compartment, the doors stayed shut. The survival of the ship mattered more than any individual sailor. In the Pacific War Zone, general quarters was often called twice daily, at dawn and dusk, the times when Japanese aircraft were most likely to attack. But alarms could come at any moment due to submarine sightings, fog, or unidentified ships. The battleship USS Washington, BB-56, logged more than 3,000 general quarters calls during the war. That meant 3,000 times when every man aboard had to sprint to his station, sometimes half-dressed and carrying his gear. Sailors quickly learned certain survival rules. Long sleeves were worn even in the heat because explosions could cause deadly flash burns on exposed skin. White sailor hats were dyed dark blue so enemy pilots could not easily spot them from the air. During the 1945 battle for Okinawa, the battleship USS Texas BB-35 experienced one of the most extreme situations of the war. Because of constant kamikaze attacks, the ship's captain kept the entire crew at general quarters for more than 50 consecutive days. Sailors slept beside their guns, ate beside their guns, and lived in constant readiness. The strain was enormous, but the ship survived the campaign without losing a single crew member. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of life aboard these battleships was the bond formed among the crew. Thousands of men lived together in steel compartments, sharing the same routines, dangers, and fears every day. They knew each other's habits, worries, and hopes. They knew who received letters from home, and who did not. One sailor from USS South Dakota, BB-57, later explained that there were moments when fear and exhaustion almost overwhelmed him. But he said the men kept going, not because they felt brave, but because continuing was simply the only option. Most of these sailors never chose war. Many were drafted and suddenly found themselves living aboard a massive steel warship that could become their workplace, home, and grave all at once. They endured extreme heat, crushing fatigue, constant boredom, and sudden terror. When the war finally ended, most returned home quietly. They removed their uniforms and rarely spoke about what they had experienced. But the ships themselves remain as reminders. The famous battleship USS Missouri, BB-63, still rests at Pearl Harbor, while USS North Carolina, BB-55, sits along the Cape Fear River, and USS Iowa, BB-61, is preserved in Los Angeles as a museum. Walk their decks today, step into the cramped sleeping compartments, and feel how close the steel walls really are. Only then can you begin to understand the reality of life aboard a world war, to battleship and the quiet endurance of the thousands of sailors who served within them.